Perfect. Good morning. My name is Allison Campbell. I do local history services here at the Washington State Historical Society. I'm joined by my colleague Dylan High, who many of you know. And today we are gathering with Sarah and Danielle from Environment and Culture Partners to talk a little bit about some resources and some tools to help cultural organizations prepare for and respond to impacts of climate change. We are very, very lucky. I talk about it all the time to their faces, behind their backs. We are so lucky to have Sarah and Danielle and their organization based here in Washington. They are really national, international leaders in the kind of space of activating the cultural sector to respond to climate change. And so we're just really lucky to have them as neighbors. And I was delighted when they agreed to come and share some of these new tools with you. I want to give a special welcome to our colleagues who are joining us from PC CERN, SHRN, and Shepherd. These are three kind of mutual aid emergency response networks that we have across the state. PC CERN is here in Pierce County. SHRN, Sarah Frederick is representing SHRN, is the Seattle Heritage Emergency Response Network. And then Britta from the Junt in Spokane has been working to put together Shepherd. Spokane Heritage Emergency Preparedness,
Yes.
and oh, wait, I forgot the other. I was going to be really proud of myself. And response to districts. I think I left out an H. Anyway, we're delighted to have these three kind of networks represented on this call today. And I'm sure any one of them, if you are located in their region and haven't heard about them, any one of them would be delighted to talk to you more about how to join those kind of networks that are designed specifically to work on emergency planning for organizations that hold collections. And so I will share Britta and Sarah's emails in my follow-up to you all as well. Okay, I think that's all from me, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Well, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Sarah Sutton. I use she, her pronouns, and I am in my home office in Tacoma. Danielle, who's going to drive the slides, and I'll try and follow her encouragement and go along. Danielle and I are both going to present today. But first, let me say, it's great to see you all here on the screen. It is an act of sheer will to show up to a future-facing conversation, especially about climate in these unpredictable times. So we are here together and doing the work, and this is a good thing. And thank you to Allison for concocting this opportunity. Danielle and I love being part of ECP, Environment and Culture Partners, because of the partnerships we have with all sorts of cultural organizations all around the country doing good work. We are museum professionals. We are not necessarily climate professionals or architects or engineers, and we don't get to spend enough time in museums ourselves. So being able to work with folks, connect with you on the screen today is a big boost to us. So we appreciate you coming. So I'll tell you a little bit about ECP, and in today's presentation, I'll tell you about ECP and about this project, Climate Resilience Resources, to give you an introduction to it. And then Danielle is going to share with you the hazard risk map, which is the real operationalized part of it. And then we'll have lots of time for discussion. But as Allison said, if you have a question as we're going through, please go ahead and type it into the chat or break in and ask, whatever. We're interested in sharing as much as we can today in real time with you. So ECP is a national nonprofit. We're sort of young. We were born in Tacoma in 2021, but that gives us a lot of opportunity to be nimble and to respond to whatever comes our way. And so we have through COVID and we have through these current times. Our job is to strengthen environmental leadership in the cultural sector. And we do that by helping zoos, museums, gardens, historic sites, performing arts, sometimes even libraries, build resilience and take climate action and environmental action. We built the work on these three pillars of capacity building, engagement, and representation. Capacity building is what we're doing today, sharing skills and tools in order to help institutions work inside their institution and with their communities on anything related to environmental and climate action. Engagement is doing research and engaging with partners in order to discover best paths forward and share that with others so that the museums and the cultural institutions can take action to address climate change. And then for representation, we like to make a little bit of noise. We want to help the cultural sector's voice be heard in the discussion about environment and climate, and to be part of what's going on in community level, state level, federal, and international on climate action. Arts and culture are a big part of climate action, and too few people keep that in their thinking. So we try and make noise about it. And we always do our work in partnerships, and one of those partnerships is called Held in Trust. We've completed the work of that and started on to the next part of the project, which is what you're going to be hearing about today. But Held in Trust was a project funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities, conducted in partnership with the Foundation for Advancement in Conservation. So if you've done any of the disaster training through AIC, it's with AIC and FAIC that we did this Held in Trust project. And the goal was to look at what are the opportunities and challenges facing the conservation of cultural heritage in the next decade or 20 years. And so we actually had a 2, maybe 3-year project where ECP sat on the team that focused on the climate crisis, looking forward 20 years on behalf of conservators of cultural heritage. And in that process, we came up with a big gap that needed to be filled, which was that folks don't have an easy way of communicating, identifying and communicating the climate threats to their institution and the impacts of those threats on their cultural heritage collections. We wanted to find something that they could tackle. We found, next slide, please. So folks were wondering how they can protect their cultural resources. Whoops, sorry. Can we go to the how can I protect? Maybe I took it out. Nope. Bingo. Okay, we'll go there. So this is the list of all the folks who spent 15 months intensely working on this particular project. So it's the FAIC that funded it, that organized it, National Endowment for the Humanities that funded it and created an advisory group, the ECP team, the Center for Geographic Analysis that did a lot of the map work with that Danielle is going to be showing you, and then all of the museums that participated in designing and then reviewing the materials we presented. So that teamwork created a great set of resources for you, and the focus was on resilience. And just to make sure that folks are understanding the way we use the word resilience, this is the definition: the ability to recover effectively and to successfully adapt to challenges through flexibility and adjustment to external and internal needs. And we put over that this climate approach. And we produce something called Climate Resilience Resources for Cultural Heritage. It's all free. It is all still on the National Endowment for the Humanities website, which gives me a note, Danielle, we need to figure out how to make sure everything is secure in case it should disappear. So if it isn't already downloaded, let's make sure it happens after this meeting. So the idea was that everybody would be able to access these materials and either guide their own work in creating this change or advocate for funding and supportive time in pursuing this work. It helps individuals examine the hazards and risks and impacts on resources, understand how climate risk affects whole communities, locally and geographically, how they can take action to manage their responsibilities towards cultural heritage resources, and then figure out how to coordinate with their neighbors who are doing this resilience work. Together, this package can help any institution do the work, but we hope it makes it easy for them to understand a path forward and then find out how to operationalize it. So let me show you some of the components. This list here tells you an overview there is a climate resilience strategy guide. So what is a climate resilience strategy and how do you go about producing it? 8 learning modules for self-directed steps through building the skills, using the tools, developing understanding to actually create that resilience strategy. Some of those tools include the map that Danielle's going to talk about, but also some of my favorites, the site vulnerability assessment that we're going to talk about in a minute. And then recommendations for how you could do all of this work with a learning group of your peers. And then once you develop this strategic approach, how you keep it moving and how you learn from each other about their experiences in creating it and then using it. So let's look at the learning modules first. There are 8 learning modules. They're available in English and Spanish with exercises to help you create the strategy. Each module follows the same format, beginning with terms and definitions and walking through core concept activities so that you get to practice what it is that you're learning. And then the next steps for completing the work or further study if you have more questions. So a significant bunch of resources in each learning module. It's a lot. We can't go through all of it now, but we can give you a few highlights. We knew from the get-go that we needed this map, and then we needed to give folks a way to communicate with funders and board members and other staff members what the urgency was by looking at the map, and then that there were steps they could safely take to respond to urgency. A map alone only makes you worried, but the learning modules and the strategic approach help you come up with a way to respond to the threat. And I know from experience, and you likely do as well, that having a plan of how to respond to a crisis significantly reduces your anxiety and stress and dramatically improves your response to the crisis so that you come out of it having managed it much more better. That's really what resilience is. So the whole package is designed to help walk you through that time period. When we worked with the process of folks with two learning groups, which I'll tell you about in a moment, we were able to do this in maybe a 6-month period. And we figure that folks take 6 to 12 months to do something like this. So it takes considerable time and effort, but you have a guide in order to do it. So let's look at one example of one of the tools. My favorite is the vulnerability assessment tool. Once you've explored this map and discovered what the particular hazards are, you can use them to fill in these blanks and understand the degree of impact that you should be concerned about. We built this spreadsheet using the vulnerability assessment tool already available at FAIC. So if you've used that for disaster planning, it looks much the same. What's different is that you see under, let's see, under hazards and NOAA and interior, that that's the list of the hazards that you will find on the map. And the map will tell you what is the likelihood of that particular hazard affecting your site. And you're able to walk through a process of understanding what the risks are to your particular collection. This is what your insights bring to it. That creates a vulnerability rating. So you know, in this particular case, the spreadsheet has calculated that your vulnerability, the vulnerability being how bad it can hurt you, your vulnerability to fire in this case is not nearly the same as that to flooding. And that helps you think about how should I strategize and prioritize my efforts at this particular location. The flooding issue has to come first, and later on, we can address the other issues of smoke and fire. Which leads me to the next example. My second favorite tool in here is the scatter chart, because you might come up with a whole bunch of things that you ought to do, and they're all a pretty good priority, but then you have to figure out how you're able to operationalize them. And using this prioritization framework, you can put on here the activities that you might consider in response to the risks, the threats, and your vulnerability. Understand that which ones cost the most or the hardest to implement, which ones might cluster together and might be done together. And from that, you can extrapolate a timeline and a sequence of implementing things. So here, this is an example of looking at that flood response. So a low cost but high complexity effort would be to adjust your event schedule so that you don't have no shows and lower income because of a bad weather event. Another high complexity but low cost is to bring the collections out of those first two levels in your basement on the shelving, vacate those two levels of shelving and move things higher up or to a different location. But they would be good first things to start with. A higher level of effort and a higher cost would be to raise all your electricals above the flood line. And you might have to think, well, that's expensive, but because we're also making these other changes at this moment, and we know this is a risk for us, we're going to put that into our contract for our next project, that we're going to raise the electrical above the flood line. These are all options that are part of your strategy, and we call it a strategy rather than a plan because we know how volatile all of this is and that a specific plan might not apply under different conditions in the future. So having a strategy of options that you understand how to apply would be the most useful for your work. This slide shows an outline of that resilience strategy you might produce at the end of all the work by completing all of these components or the ones that are most appropriate for your institution. You not only record the what and the how, but also the why of your thinking. That why part helps others use this plan in the future and do dynamic thinking, dynamic responses to whatever situation they find themselves in the future. And I have one more slide to show with you. It's sort of to plant an idea that the response groups that are a part of this might consider creating learning groups in order to work through this climate resilience resources. We piloted all of these tools with the groups in Puerto Rico and New Mexico, and they helped us refine the process. Spoiler alert, they said the scatter chart was their favorite part. At least Puerto Rico thought that it was their favorite part. But we found that by having this group working together, they not only understood their particular region well and supported each other with good knowledge about on-the-ground experience, but they kept each other accountable because there was that next meeting coming where everyone was supposed to have completed the next module and be ready to present. And they found it was a very effective way in moving forward with their progress. So we've provided all sorts of resources in this that help you think about how to plan those meetings, how to keep notes, how to make progress through particular modules, and how to keep up in communication so that you can successfully complete the project. And we hope that you'll consider trying something like that. So now I'll turn it over to Danielle, who will talk to you about the map.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I appreciate it. And I'm not seeing any initial questions, so I'm just going to jump right into this. But feel free to put your questions in the chat. Sarah, if you don't mind taking a look at those while I'm presenting, just in case those come up, I appreciate it. All right, so the intention for this section is just to provide a really high-level introduction to this hazard risk assessment map as part of the overall resilience resources. And this is because there's a lot that you can do with it, and we just want to give you enough so that you can start exploring it too and start your overall resiliency planning process. And after these next really few very brief introductory slides, we'll maybe spend about 5 minutes here. We'll go right to the map together so that you can see how it works. And I just want to emphasize there are other hazard risk maps out there, but this is the only one that has all these different functionalities here on this slide, all in one place that helps protect cultural heritage and heritage sites now and in the future. So using this map, you can learn about climate hazards that have impacted your site and community based on historical data. You can quickly understand and visualize the highest priority hazards, some of which might not have already been on your radar. And you can assess the risk of future hazards using data sets, authoritative data sets based on climate models, and start that planning process. And we're not going to talk too much about that for this section, but Sarah touched on that quite a bit. just like the learning modules and that risk vulnerability assessment. And those tools used in tandem with the map can really take you to that planning piece. So just some key things to know about the data that supports this map. And essentially, you'll be able to put in the address of your site to the map and actually get at that level. But the map only has data for locations in the US and its territories. And there's going to be more information about the lower 48 states than, say, Hawaii, Alaska, and the territories. And each data set is based on climate models and historical data, but they also have different ways of estimating hazards, and they cover different time periods. And the reason for having all these different data sets, as I'll share in a moment, because when they're used together, these data sets can provide more information and more context to help with your planning. So these are the data sets that are in the map that are listed here. And I just want to go into these a little bit so that you can feel confident, one, knowing where this information is coming from, but I think it'll also help you understand at a base level how to read and use the map. So first here in this list is current, or essentially weather in real time, and it's based on various national live feeds like NOAA, National Weather Service, NASA satellite information. And then you can get a next year projection or near term projection using FEMA data, which is based on historical data. And then there's all these future projections all the way to 2099 using information from NOAA and Climate Check. And Climate Check is likely the only organization that's new to you on this list. It's a private company that really generously made its hazard projection data available for this project. And as I mentioned before, these varied data sets are really important because you can use them together and it'll give you a greater picture and more context to inform your next steps. So for example, the FEMA data in this tool is based solely on historical data, and it doesn't include input from climate models. But because the climate is changing, we recommend that FEMA shouldn't be used by itself for future planning and instead should be used with other data sets. And this is because FEMA really does serve a useful purpose. And one, it's credible. It's been used for decades and it's well understood by many in the field of risk assessment. But it also includes a more comprehensive list of hazards than data sets that are based on climate models or those future projections. It also includes hazard scoring, which Climate Check does as well, but the NOAA data set for the most part does not. So the other data set I want to mention is this Climate Check site level report, and I'll show you on the map where that's at, how to do that. It's a little bit different than the data sets I was showing you previously because it's not an overlay on the map, and it provides information that's based on your exact coordinates, whereas the other data sets is going to give you, it's like census tract information, so it gives you a larger landmass information. But you can get a snapshot to start with of these various risks. And you can also get a full free report, which all it does is ask for your email address, and the report comes in a few minutes. And it's a pretty comprehensive report without being overwhelming. So if you start with one thing, the Climate Check site level report is a really great way to start. And then just a couple other considerations to think about when you're considering using this map. So as I'm sure you're all very well aware, there's a shifting federal landscape. So this means for this project that some data has or may in the future change. So we'll look at in a moment, there's a section of the map that's meant to provide context to your site and community in terms of the EPA's former climate and economic justice screening tool. So for now, the field appears to be working, but the source is only accessible through an archive. It's actually linked in our slides here, and we're happy to share the slides with you all afterwards, after this presentation. So just take that with a grain of salt, know it might go away. And the other piece is that NOMA and FEMA data may also be unavailable in the future. But we think Climate Check will be relatively safe because it's a private company versus these federal sources. Okay. So I'm going to pause there and take us over to the map. Bear with me here for a minute. All right. And can I get a thumbs up, Allison, if you can make sure. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'll move over here too. All right. So this is our, if you're unfamiliar with the Climate Resilience Resources website, and I'm going to take us over to the map portion. So this is where you can put in your address. And for our example today, I'm going to be using the historic Union Club in downtown Tacoma, which is also ECP's headquarters. And we can see here a really great satellite image of downtown Tacoma and Union Club marked right there. So I just want to point out and start with our risk time periods, or again, those data sets. And we'll start with climate check here. And because it's a little bit different than the other data sets that are the map overlays, I'm going to start with that site level report from climate check. So here we go. I've got this really great snapshot of some projected risks and climate impacts for this, and specifically these coordinates, Union Club in downtown Tacoma, not just the surrounding area, but specifically Union Club. And if we hover over these different ones, we can see some information. So this is saying, you know, that we're expecting some impacts from sea level rise. And if I want to get the full free report, like I said, all you do is you put in your email address and then submit, and it comes. Like, you don't have to give a lot of extra information. So it's a really helpful report, really comprehensive, like I said, and not overwhelming. All right. And something else I wanted to point out, and again, differences between climate check, the site level report, and this climate check map overlay. So like I said, climate check, the site level report are based on your coordinates, whereas, you know, we're using climate check, this map overlay, it's for a larger swath of area. It's based on census tract. And the reason that's important, you know, if your site is right next to a stream, well, that's going to be really important for your planning purposes, but it's going to be different information than what you're going to receive for the greater area. But so they measure different things, but they're both important for the planning piece. And one other thing I want to note about climate check, so this is one of the data sets that doesn't work for Alaska, Hawaii, and the territories. So just bear in mind if you wanted to share this with other colleagues, it unfortunately doesn't work in those areas. All right, so let's actually go into some of the map overlays. We'll start with climate check, we're there. And if I unhide and show the precipitation impact, and we can see also all these different events, and then the corresponding severity score going from extreme all the way to relatively low. And if I were to hover over all these different icons, it gives me some information specifically about those impacts to cultural heritage. So we can see water incursion and flooding, and then there at the very bottom, you know, potential utilities failure. So lots of really helpful information. Each one of these events will have that kind of example. And if I pop this down, I can get even more information about that particular event. Now, frankly, when I first started looking at this, this is like a lot of gobbledygook. I did not want to get into the weeds. It's very interesting once you get into it. And if you do want to learn more about it, you can. So if you go to like Build Resilience, this will take you right to one of our user guides and give you some information. Of course, it's taking a little bit longer. But it'll give you information about what that specific event is, and then all those different projections. So it's not, you know, it's being a little slow right now because I'm sharing my screen, but it gives you some really good information. I'll try and pop back over there too and show you what that looks like. All right, let's look at another event. So we'll hide that. Let's go to heat. So again, so this is a high severity, and this is again getting large swaths of the Tacoma area, including Union Club, and what that risk rating is, and some of the projections for the year 2050. And same for flood. I'm sure we're all anticipating floods being an impact. And one thing I was really particularly interested in was this rating for flood defense. Is this working now? No. When I was looking into this and was able to click that Build Resilience and get our user guide, what it tells me is essentially that there's, from climate check data, there's zero or no defense that they were able to find from like national databases showing that there's seawalls, levees, that kind of thing. And for folks in downtown Tacoma, there might be different information, but again, that's where like having some context is really helpful. And also, take some of this with a grain of salt because your sites best. But this is just information that you can and angles that you can use to inform your planning. All right. Last couple things I want to use or show you all, at least with this example for climate check, are these little gray boxes. So the level of risk to orgs and community is dependent on the resiliency of your community and like the buildings. So this is showing us that in this part of Tacoma, this is actually that information from EPA that may go away. So for now we've got it, but this is saying that 38% of the community is considered using that tool disadvantaged because it's saying that they're overburdened by whether that's economic, climate, environment, or environmental circumstances. And for instance, wealth for sure is going to impact the ability for resiliency in particular areas. So something to be, again, just another layer to be thinking about in that planning piece. And similarly, the building codes around your area. So this is just telling us that in this area, 100% of the county is required to adhere to a hazard resistant building code. But there's also other ratings like partially resistant and lower resistance. Again, it just helps us consider the spaces that we exist in, our communities exist in, and how we need to include these in our planning. So if wildfire is a major occurrence, for our folks in the eastern part of the state that are joining us today, it might be helpful to be considering whether there's new buildings being built around you that are required to adhere to building codes that require fireproof materials. So another thing to help us consider. All right, so I want to just check out another couple of these data sets. I know that we want to get to our discussion, so I'll just spend another 5 minutes or so. But here we have our FEMA information. And right off the bat, so this is our near-term projections. There's several more events that are listed here. So it's quite a bit different than what we were seeing with climate check. And what I'd also like to point out, so earthquake is right there at the top. I mean, an earthquake is not a climate-related event. But if we take that in context with the information from climate check, which was showing us that there's a really high severity rating for flood, for precipitation events, those two things can converge and compound the impact of those events. So for example, our communities of practice, one of those was in Puerto Rico. Well, they had a massive earthquake, and then they were pretty quickly impacted by a hurricane. And so these things just compound, and it's helpful to have that kind of context of near term and future planning. And I also just want to point out NOAA. We'll just take a quick peek at this. So I said before that NOAA doesn't have a severity level rating. It doesn't, but what's special again about this map is climate check is overlaid with NOAA. So we're able to get some information about that severity rating just to help inform our planning. And the biggest thing with NOAA that I want to point out, so we do have all the way to 2099. You can go to these different sets here, but what I think is more valuable and more helpful, at least for that beginning process, is you can go to one of the drop downs for any one of these events, and you'll see a graph that'll show you early century, mid-century, and late century to help you consider that planning. So just wanted to bear that in mind. Now, there's a lot of other functionalities that we can talk about, and if we want to, we can maybe do that in the discussion portion. But mostly, I just want to emphasize, that this is, you can go as deep or as light as you want with this, but your site best. And, maybe you pick out one of these, you just start with one of these events and, start to investigate the resiliency planning around that. And then you do that with a colleague, because you don't need to do this alone. And luckily you're surrounded by a lot of people in this group that are invested and interested in doing this. So yeah, I think we'll stop there for any questions and the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, Danielle and Sarah, for explaining things that are very complex very clearly. And I agree. I love that prioritization framework scatter chart. I think what I like so much about these tools is that they'll be really great for case making, right, to decision makers. It'll help you, I think it'll help staff really understand the risks and the needs to build resilience, and then explain those to their boards and their directors. I'm going to share, I was waiting to share the direct link because I knew everybody would just immediately plug their address in and start playing. And I was being very teacherly and I wanted to try and keep our focus on all the great information you were sharing. But we will, of course, share the slides and the links. But does anybody have any questions right off the bat that you'd like to just go ahead and unmute and ask Sarah and Danielle? Or is this the kind of thing where we all need to process and maybe follow up by email with questions specific to our sites or specific once we've dug into the tools? I'll just open it up. Now everybody's on the website looking at the, yeah.
Well, in the meantime, I would like to also just say that I know I suspect that this, while it is exciting and maybe we're excited to kind of play with it, it can be a lot of information to take in, and it might also maybe when we're thinking about these kinds of plans, it might feel like, well, this is a lot of extra stuff, and how do we really think about this? And I think it doesn't have to be duplicative. It may also validate work that you're already doing, certainly in this group, and certainly can go along with the things that organizations are already doing. And a lot of the planning that is being done focuses a lot on some of the acute issues. So like, near-term emergencies, and this kind of planning helps to look not just 5 years in advance or 5-year strategic plan, but 50 or 100 years into the future, and how we can maintain and support and protect our collections, our community, much, much farther in time.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Anne.
So I'm one of those Eastern Washington sites. And so of course,
Yeah.
wildfire is one of ours. So I liked on your risk, the scatter chart, where would I go to find what I should do? Because like you mentioned with the flood example, bringing things to shelves up and everything, where could I find the information on what to do for a fire? How to prepare for that, like prepare my collection room if wildfires are getting close for that scatter chart.
The that Excel chart beforehand
Okay.
has when you figure out what your severity and your vulnerability is, that has information embedded in the chart are what are some of the usual activities in response to this vulnerability. So that will get you started on it. And then a lot of this is designed to bring outside information, stuff we didn't go to school for in our collections care and history management. So it brings the climate and the response information, but you are the best interpreters of that. So it has some good ideas, and you'll say, these 3 are good, and these make no sense in my space. And so you won't choose that 4th idea, but the other 3 will be appropriate for you, and you'll choose to prioritize those.
Thank you.
I was thinking about you, Anne, and I was thinking about Danielle when you just sort of mentioned that kind of data around building codes. One thing we've thought a lot about here in Pierce County, and sort of opportunities for non-collecting organizations to really step up in those moments, right? If you know that there's an office building that has been built with the state-of-the-art fire suppressant, fireproofing, having conversations early on about a possible evacuation site for high priority collections, those relationships, kind of bringing in more non-traditional partners into this planning, or like I think could be really interesting and helping them understand what your needs would be in a situation like that. For sure. Yeah.
And I don't have experience with fire directly, but I've been watching the Gettys work for 2 decades. And the story of their response to the wildfires is textbook perfect.
Yeah.
And it's,
Of course,
yes,
they have a
indeed.
lot of money, Sarah.
So
So much
my next
money.
response is, indeed, they had the money. But somebody planned that when
Yeah.
they were going to put in irrigation, they also put in a system that could um, hold extra water, so that when they needed to run the irrigation extra because of the fire, they already had the sources and the system there. So lots of times when they were making a change for other reasons, they included a resilience component to an existing change. And that's where we find most people get the greatest traction. A project is already going to happen and they improve it with
Yeah.
a resilience value.
Yeah. I'd imagine, when I think about smoke impact, like obviously having an HVAC system that can be upgraded to account for smoke. And, here in the state of Washington, I know that our colleagues at the Wanapum Heritage Center, that space was really constructed with wildfire in mind, and they're an incredible example of, building a resilient home for your collection and your museum. Um, okay, any other? I'm looking at Amber as I know they start to work on a new museum. They're for the Puyallup tribe. That'll be great to be able to kind of weave all of this into your planning from the very start with a new building, instead of those of us who are retro, trying to take buildings that are already vulnerable and figuring out how we can shore them up to make them more resilient.
That's very true. And thank you for your presentation. And I apologize, I jumped on so late, but I just wanted to pop in and kind of see what was happening at a meeting that ran over. But yes, the same crew that did the design for Wanapum is also working with us to design our museum. So a lot of these thoughts are floating around in our head and making sure that we're doing things for the future and not necessarily for today.
Yeah, I love that. We all are so excited to watch your project unfold, Amber. And I'll share the link to the recording so you can watch the parts that you missed of the
Thank
conversation today.
you.
Yeah, of course. Um, yeah, I do think that I think that there's just a lot of content on the website. And I do think that folks will maybe need to sit with it and spend some time exploring, and questions may come up, and knowing Sarah and Danielle, they will be happy to field questions. I also did want to just speak a little bit to kind of the learning modules. I do think here for Pierce County organizations, I think I'll bring it to our group to kind of take that on and kind of work our way through the modules together. I think that makes a lot of sense, especially since we have larger organizations and smaller organizations. The impacts will be relatively similar since we're situated geographically nearby. And I suspect our colleagues at Shern and Shepherd, may want to do that as well. And yes, I will share the contacts for Shern and Shepherd and CERN, all these acronyms, in my follow-up email for sure. Yep. Yeah, and thanks to Sarah and Britta, of course. Okay, well,
Actually,
yeah,
can I just
Dylan.
quick question, Danielle and Sarah? I was around that. Doing these kind of learning groups, I was kind of curious from you about lessons learned of kind of what worked well for groups as they're kind of working through this as a group. Yeah, how to get the most out of those kind of like learning networks or kind of working with peers on kind of working through these modules.
We'll do a compare and contrast. The the learning group that was most successful already had a shared bond of having been through the earthquake and the hurricane. And the other group had shared interests, but hadn't gone through something together. And that really that made it a little harder to pull the second group together. Still worth it, still important, and they still got plans out of it. It's still developing that friends from before approach that you need so that when you have the first shared crisis, you know what to do. But it was easier if you'd already been through something together. So just acknowledge that and keep working. And then this project funded a facilitator to keep everyone on track. And in a perfect world, everyone has a facilitator that's not also creating their plan that can help with that. It would be interesting to see how people would do it without an outside facilitator, if they were to rotate who was in charge, or there was one institution that was in a position to commit to facilitate while also creating their plan. But having someone who's responsible for that helped a lot.
That's good to hear, Sarah. That is, potentially a role that Dylan or I could play as we become more familiar with the resources and the modules, just to be that outside person. Yeah. Is there any point during the sort of like the learning community process where it would be appropriate to include local emergency management staff? Or is that really sort of something that you kind of loop them in separately and you kind of share the materials with, or do your regular outreach to them? But do you see a role for those folks?
In the module that talks about working with the community, it definitely includes working with local emergency management. We felt bad when we designed the module sequence that we put the community part at the end, because you don't want to have it at the end. But we also understood that folks felt like they needed to work through a lot before they went public in any way with it. And so the modules are front loaded with that sort of learning. But in a perfect world, you would let your local team know that you're working on this and that you would be like to have them as partners in the project. I would think that would be awesome. And a little personal thing in this process of developing the resources, I became anxious about my city of Tacoma. And so I enrolled in the Community Emergency Response Team training that FEMA supports, and am now a proud member of Tacoma CERT. And it was really helpful for understanding how people who aren't in cultural institutions approach a disaster. And it was the only way I felt I could confidently figure out how to integrate with them. So if you've got a community emergency response team to work with, and Tacoma does, with an advocate for culture, I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah, that's great. That's almost sort of the equivalent. Like, we're always talking about how museums can get more lodging tax funding. And my response is always like, find somebody that you can get to fill one of the seats on the lodging tax on the LTAC committee. Like, you need somebody on the inside. And this is sort of the same thing when things are really complex. How can you make sure that the cultural sector is considered, right, as decisions are being made, and especially when they're sort of in the moment. Yeah, that's great. Wonderful. Well, thanks, Danielle, for sharing that specific module. I'll definitely take a look at it. Okay, I'm going to slowly sign off. And if anybody wants to unmute with the last question, you're welcome to. Otherwise, Danielle and Sarah, do you have parting words? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say too that although we're all sort of in limbo with federal funding, this project was granted another grant for continued work. So I don't know where we're at with that right now.
Was it
but I just want to
NEH
say
funding?
it was IMLS, Sarah? Or NEH?
No, it's NEH for
Oh, it is
training
NEH.
trainers. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so for training trainers. So
Better
so
than
still,
IMLS.
yeah.
Okay,
And
great.
then Yeah. And then the other thing is that Allison, Sarah, and I will be presenting at WAMA on this. And then, of course, the Emergency Response Network that you all are doing really great work on at the Washington Museum Association conference in June. So there'll be probably some new information there as well. Hopefully jump more into the Eastern Washington parts as well too with the map. So wanted to mention that too.
Perfect. And I'll share the registration is open for the conference now. So I'll be sure to share all of that in our email out to everyone as well later today. Thank you so much, Sarah and Danielle. And thanks to everybody who joined us for this conversation. Look for an email from us and have a great rest of your day. Bye, Amber.
Thank you all.
Take
Keep
care,
at it.
everyone.
Mhm.
Yep. Thank you.